Hey, what's going on, football fans? Welcome back to the channel. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. Alright, so for this video, I will be giving what I think the college football playoff bracket should look like after week 11. So we had some teams with big wins. We had some teams with bad losses that caused a shakeup in this week's bracket. So here is what I think the playoff bracket should look like after week 11. So we'll start at number 1, and I'm actually going to put Texas A&M at number 1. They had a big win on the road versus Missouri. Now, Missouri still had a chance to make the playoffs, but that loss to Texas A&M at home has basically derailed their playoff hopes. And Texas A&M, I think they have the best resume overall. I think they're the best. I think they're the best all-around team: offense, defense, special teams. They have looked phenomenal this year. I think they should be the number 1 seed in the playoffs after week 11. I got Indiana at number 2. Now, Indiana had a scare this past weekend on the road against a Penn State team that has obviously had its struggles. They fired James Franklin. And Indiana, Penn State just needed, they needed a spark, I guess you could say. And they almost got it. But Fernando Mendoza, he had, I guess what many would say, a Heisman moment, driving down the field on that last play. And that receiver for Indiana, I forget his name, he had that touchdown, literally inches inside the goal line from going out of bounds. But that was a catch. It was in bounds. He actually got both feet down, for that matter. So Indiana, they proved why they're one of the top teams in the country. And so I'm going to put Indiana, though, at number 2. I'm going to put Ohio State at 3. And so Ohio State, they had another big win, this time over Purdue on the road. And so they keep their spot in that first round bye. And then I still got Alabama at 4. So Alabama, they did beat LSU this past weekend. This was LSU's first game without Brian Kelly as their head coach. And so, Alabama just keeps on rolling. And as I've said before, this is a much different Alabama team than what we saw in week 1 when they had that loss to Florida State. And so Alabama just keeps on rolling. So at number 5, I have Georgia. So Georgia went on the road to Mississippi State, and they had a pretty convincing win over the Bulldogs. And a lot of people thought that maybe Mississippi State could potentially pull off the upset. They've had some close games this year against teams that, like teams like Tennessee. They upset then-ranked Arizona State earlier in the year. And so but Georgia held their own, and they got the win over Mississippi State. I've got Oregon at number 6. So Oregon had a scare this weekend, too, against Iowa. Iowa also had, they still had playoff hopes as well. And so I know the conditions weren't that great. It was cold. It was raining. And so Oregon found a way to win. Looked like Iowa was going to pull off the upset, but Oregon, they got that last-second field goal and ultimately survived and kept their playoff hopes alive as well. I've got Ole Miss at 7, so Ole Miss played some FCS team. I can't even remember who it was, but they blew them out as expected, and so Ole Miss, they're still a playoff team. I've got them at 7. I've got Texas Tech at 8. So Texas Tech had a big statement win this past weekend versus BYU. And so they're in the driver's seat as far as the Big 12 goes, and Texas Tech easily could be a dangerous team come playoff time. Keep an eye out for the Red Raiders. And so I've got Oklahoma at 9. Now, I don't think Oklahoma played this week. Now, they do have that matchup with Alabama coming up this week, and that ought to be an interesting game. I'm interested to see if the Sooners can slow down that Alabama offense and keep their playoff hopes alive. I've got Georgia Tech at 10. So Georgia Tech didn't even play this week, and they're back in the playoffs. So because some teams in the ACC like Louisville and Virginia had bad losses, well, that puts Georgia Tech right back up at the top of the ACC. Now, the ACC is still wide open. Virginia is still in the mix. SMU is in the mix. Duke is in the mix. Pitt is in the mix. So it's a logjam at the top of the ACC, and it's going to be very interesting to see with all these tiebreaker scenarios how that plays out. But for the time being, I have Georgia Tech in the playoffs as the 10 seed. And then I got Notre Dame at 11. So because some teams fell out this week and had some losses like BYU and Virginia, I've got Notre Dame at number 11. So they're in the playoffs. But I cannot stress this enough. Every game is a must-win for the Irish. And they have a huge game coming up this upcoming weekend versus Pitt. Pitt is the hottest team in the ACC. They've won 5 in a row, and their offense is playing a whole lot better than it was when they started out the season. So keep an eye out for Pitt. And so at number 12, I have Tulane. So Tulane, I have them getting the Group of 5 spot. They had a big blowout win versus Memphis on the road, mind you, this past weekend. And I still think that it's going to come down to the American Conference. Whoever wins that conference is going to be the Group of 5 representative. But don't count out JMU or James Madison out of the Sun Belt. James Madison only has one loss, and that was on the road to Louisville. And so keep an eye out for the Dukes. And so, but with that, I have Tulane as my 12 seed. And so my first 4 out, I have BYU, Texas, Utah, and Michigan. Now, BYU, they're still in contention in the Big 12, and the Big 12 is wide open as well. BYU, they had that big loss to Texas Tech on the road this past weekend, so that knocks them out of the playoffs. And I do think that the Big 12 is only going to get one team into the playoffs, just like the ACC. Texas is still in the mix. They have that big showdown with Georgia coming up, a rematch from last year's SEC title game. And so that ought to be interesting. Texas is a much different team as well. But one thing that might keep them out is that loss to Florida. And Florida got blown out by Kentucky this past week, and that certainly does not help Texas at all. And so we'll see what happens. Utah is still in the mix. The thing is, though, Utah, they lost to BYU, and that could be crucial for the Utes if they want to win the Big 12. They also lost to Texas Tech, who's in the playoffs. And then Michigan. So Michigan is still in the mix as well. I think that game with Ohio State ought to be interesting at the end of the year. Michigan has owned Ohio State over the past several years, and so it'll be interesting to see what if the Wolverines can possibly sneak into the playoffs. My next 4 out is Virginia, Vanderbilt, Cincinnati, and Pittsburgh. So Vandy, they had a scare this weekend versus Auburn. They had to go to overtime to win that game at home versus Auburn. This was Auburn's first game without Hugh Freeze as the head coach. Virginia, as I said before, their offense has not looked the same, even though they had won 7 in a row. But Virginia suffered a big loss versus Wake Forest at home. And so, despite that, though, Virginia is still in the mix for the ACC. As I said, it's a logjam at the top. Georgia Tech, Virginia, Pittsburgh, SMU, and Duke each have one loss in the ACC. And so, it's going to be a very interesting stretch within these next few weeks. But see, Virginia plays Duke, who also has one loss. Georgia Tech's got to play Pitt next week. Louisville has to play SMU, even though Louisville has 2 losses. But still, technically, Louisville is still alive. So I guess if you want to call it that. Cincinnati, they're still in the mix for the Big 12 as well. So, the Bearcats have been a surprise team this year in the Big 12 and in college football. Not many people expected them to do what they have done, but they're going to need some help too. So we'll just keep an eye out for that. And then Pittsburgh, they've been the hottest team in the ACC. They've won 5 in a row ever since they made that switch at quarterback from Eli Holstein to Mason Heinschel. They have looked like a completely different ball club. And so Pitt plays Notre Dame this week, and then they got Georgia Tech the week after. They also have to play Miami as well. So Miami's not technically out of it yet. So, but Pitt is playing really well as of late, so we'll see what happens with that. And then my group of 5 contenders, I've got James Madison just on the outside looking in, South Florida, North Texas, and Memphis. So, as I said, it's a logjam at the top of the AAC as well. So we'll see how things turn out going forward. You know, Memphis I still think is alive, but that loss that they had to Tulane certainly does not help matters much. JMU is still in the mix. North Texas is in the mix as well. So that is my college football playoff bracket. After week 11, what does your bracket look like? Who do you think should be in? Who do you think should be out? Who do you think should be seated where? Let me know down below in the comments section, guys. And as always, thanks for watching. Catch you next time.